Well, my name is Sonya Horsford, and I'm an associate professor of education at George Mason University. And I study issues of educational leadership and policy, equity and opportunity, and I'm really interested around issues concerning school desegregation and resegregation. And as a native of Las Vegas, I became very interested in the history of school desegregation here in my own community, and the implications for that history for educational equality today. This presentation is really part of a larger study on the history of school desegregation in Las Vegas. And it's really important to understand the larger history of African Americans in Las Vegas to be able to tell this story. And fortunately, as I began to study school desegregation, there's been a lot of work done around the history of the African American experience. And so through the work that's occurring at the UNLV Libraries and Oral History Project, as well as a book published by Brenda Williams entitled The West Side School, which included a lot of alumni stories from African Americans who attended one of the historic schools in Las Vegas. It provided a rich resource to be able to better understand the history of school segregation and later the desegregation efforts that took place to advance educational equity and opportunity. Really, there's two aims of this particular presentation. It's to, one, tell that story of school desegregation and resegregation in Las Vegas from 1968 to 1994. And 1968 is an important date because it is the year that the lawsuit was brought forward by the NAACP against the Clark County School District that challenged the maintenance of separate schools by race. And secondly, an aim is to really locate this story of school desegregation in Las Vegas within the national kind of conversation around equity and opportunity, as well as the current context of educational equity in the Clark County School District today. We used historical case methods to get a better understanding of the story of desegregation, pulled a lot of information from legal cases and court cases, as well as newspaper articles and magazines that were published between 1968 and 1994. As well as the multitude of Clark County School District reports and documents and plans that helped to identify the different decisions that the district had to make in order to ensure that it was providing equal educational opportunities to all children. Perhaps most importantly for this particular analysis of our study was looking at the oral histories of parents, of teachers, of administrators, school board members, policymakers, church pastors and leaders and activists, and getting their perspective and their side of the story, because much of the historical record focuses on kind of the mainstream newspaper accounts, but really getting a sense of some of the other complexities and challenges around school desegregation was important. And so those oral histories that we were able to access from UNLV and as well as through our own interviews was really valuable to this process. Some of the overall themes really that this particular local community history of desegregation in Las Vegas helps to advance this larger issue for the struggle for equal education. And so in America, we know that schools and education are really kind of the site of possibility, a place where you work hard, study hard, and do well, you can recognize the American dream. And so schools really serve as a proxy for a lot of other things. It were opportunity more broadly. And so we wanted to talk about the story of school desegregation in Clark County as part of that larger opportunity narrative, highlight African American perspectives especially, which we didn't find as much of in the literature, and as well as perspectives of people who actually lived in West Las Vegas, whether black or white, and help to develop a community counter-narrative. And so in a lot of the education research, we're beginning to talk more about those perspectives that have not been shared in the scholarship and bring voice to the people who may not have made the history books. Another more recent occurrence while we were doing this work was an evaluation report that was conducted by the UCLA Civil Rights Project. And Professor Gary Orfield, who is a world-renowned desegregation expert, was asked to do that evaluation. And he essentially told the school board that we have a serious problem. that the desegregation plan that you implemented, known as the Prime 6 plan, is actually on a path to getting worse. Things are not better than when they were implemented, and so it's going to take leadership to really help to make sure that all children are having access to equal education. And so that also gave us a sense of urgency around exploring the status of desegregation plans. Coupled with that was student achievement in West Las Vegas. While we often hear that Clark County and the state are really struggling as it relates to high school graduation rates and whether or not students are able to complete or go on to college, student achievement in West Las Vegas was even worse comparatively than student achievement in other parts of the school district. And this came out in Orfield's evaluation. They found that Prime 6 students performed below the school district average on math and reading. They found that Prime 6 black and brown students in the Prime 6 area performed less than their black and brown peers who attended schools outside of the Prime 6 area. And they also found that children who qualified for free and reduced lunch that attended Prime 6 schools fared below in terms of performance compared to poor students outside of the district. And so his concern was that we really need to utilize options to get those students to be able to access schools outside of their neighborhood schools. And when we talk about Prime 6, that's the name of the voluntary desegregation plan. It really is the attendance zone that includes a large portion of West Las Vegas, which is again the historically African American community in Las Vegas. Now, one of the challenges of that is the other argument, which suggests that we should have high quality schools in every neighborhood and we shouldn't have to move children out of their neighborhood for them to access a quality education. And so this is a list of the Prime 6 schools as they're currently identified in the school district, and again are located in historic West Las Vegas. Although historically there were 95 to 100% black, more recently we've seen with demographic change that the population is pretty much 45% black, 45% Latino, a 30% English learner population, and so those demographic changes also contribute to new conversations that need to be taking place around providing equal education. The focus of this work is really to find out why Prime 6 schools needed to exist in the first place. For people that aren't familiar with that history, why do we have Prime 6 schools? Secondly, why were black students primarily attending these schools in West Las Vegas? And third, what led to the desegregation of Clark County School District schools? To provide some more context, West Las Vegas is really the site of black settlement in Las Vegas. And so you have many black families during the second migration who moved to escape the segregation of the Jim Crow South to Nevada for jobs, for employment, and to kind of be able to leave Jim Crow segregation behind. And so we have a large black population that originated from Arkansas, Louisiana, and Mississippi. And although we never had de jure or legalized segregation here in the state of Nevada or in Las Vegas, the practices of segregation were still very common and widely accepted. And so although they were hoping to escape this separate but equal system, they found themselves in that same situation here in the West. And so between 1931 and the 1960s, Las Vegas engaged in de facto segregation, where housing, schools, employment were all limited for black Americans. In a Las Vegas Sun editorial in 1960, it really highlighted the huge economic disparity between life in West Las Vegas and some of the luxurious aspects of the Strip and other parts of the valley. And this unfortunately continues to be seen today. In terms of schools, there was a school known as the West Side School, where many African Americans attended. It is now listed on the National Register of Historic Places. It's the oldest remaining schoolhouse. And as I mentioned earlier, Brenda Williams' book, The West Side School, provides some nice reflections and stories from African Americans who are still living and active in their communities today who attended that school as elementary children. One of the things that made desegregation unique to Las Vegas was the fact that we've always had a very small African American population. And so when you talk about desegregating schools by race in the South, where you have larger black population, it's a little bit easier to get to the numbers that you're trying to target. But in Las Vegas, it's always been fairly small and historically concentrated in West Las Vegas. And so as you began to see Las Vegas booming in population overall, there was construction of new elementary schools in West Las Vegas, many of which now are prime 6 schools. And so there's some really striking data when you look at black student enrollment between 1972 and 1992. In 1972, you had 76.5% of African Americans living in West Las Vegas, compared to 1992, 31.2% that were living in West Las Vegas. And so you have this inverse relationship where historically you had the majority of blacks living in West Las Vegas and attending school there. And now, because blacks have larger housing options, they're more distributed and choosing to live in places outside of West Las Vegas. Nevertheless, the black student population was still pretty high in terms of the elementary schools in West Las Vegas. And so, as we see this shift happening in terms of black student enrollment, if we go back to 1954 with the Brown versus Board of Education decision, at a federal level we see now that separate schools are deemed inherently unequal. So that really changes things in terms of the school district needing to identify ways to make sure that those schools are not separate based on race, and making sure that they are complying with these new federal expectations. And so in May of 1968, we see the first lawsuit in Las Vegas, which was Kelly versus Mason. Herbert Kelly was a parent and teacher, but really it was Charles Keller, who was an attorney from New York. He was the president of the NAACP chapter in Brooklyn, who was then sent, like many NAACP attorneys were, to different communities across the United States to help to dismantle segregation in the schools. And so Charles Keller led this lawsuit in 1968 at a time when more than 97% of elementary students in West Las Vegas were black. And 75% of the district's black students were enrolled in one of these schools in West Las Vegas. Additionally, the majority of black teachers were assigned to schools in the West Side. And all of the 3 black principals that existed in the Clark County School District were principals in West Las Vegas. So we had a very segregated system. And so in 1968, Charles Keller sues the Clark County School District. Mason was the name of the superintendent at the time. And he argued that white students were bused to white schools, although the West Side schools were closer to their homes, and that black elementary students found it difficult to transfer from one school to another, and that the school board had manipulated elementary school boundaries to perpetuate segregation. And so that was the basis of the case, that the school district was intentionally perpetuating segregation, and that needed to end. And the court agreed. It's interesting because there were many different community perspectives around how to desegregate the schools. What would be the best way to do this? Because a lot of it was a result of housing, and there were really no laws that were mandating segregation. It was based on where people lived. And so the NAACP also felt that, again, this larger issue was that the burden of desegregating the schools would also be placed on the backs of African Americans, because they would need to be the ones sending their children to other schools to desegregate the schools. And so Reverend Jesse Scott, who was the executive director of the NAACP at the time and now has an elementary school named after him in North Las Vegas, was quoted saying that the NAACP feels that black people who are innocent of the creation of the need for a monster known as busing should not be required to bear the brunt of the school integration burden through one-way busing, housing segregation, and the drawing of racial attendance zones that made busing necessary. And so on the one hand, you have the NAACP doing whatever they can to dismantle school segregation because it's wrong, and because they felt that educational equity and opportunity was important, and that you needed to do that to realize that for all students. But you also had the executive director of the local NAACP saying the burden of doing that should not be placed on the backs of the black community. And so from a school district perspective, you had a dilemma in terms of having to heed the court's order, as well as managing the various community perspectives around the best way to do this. Everyone pretty much agreed that they wanted to have equal resources for their children and equal opportunity, but how you did that and what that looked like was very different depending on who you asked. In the oral history archive at UNLV, the League of Women Voters for Las Vegas Valley has a huge record of archives there, and they were very active in pushing for school desegregation. They were a huge proponent of this, and they have notes from a meeting with then Superintendent James Mason, who told them, if you want integration, you're going to have to pay the price. And in March of 1969, Bernice Moten, who was also a member of the League of Women Voters, and Eva Simmons, they were actually black members of the League, many of them were white women, presented a minority report to the school board that says, we challenge you to take a position that favors integration for all without placing undue burden on any segment of the population. Make a decision that is fair and just. So again, this is a very difficult decision that the school district has to come to grips with, but the court helped them to do that. by making it mandatory. In 1969, the school district proposed its own plan. It was the Action Plan for Integration. This plan really sought to implement a freedom of choice plan. And so white parents could choose to send their students to school in West Las Vegas, and black parents could choose to send their kids to other places. Well, it didn't really work because many white parents didn't exercise that option. And so the court said this is not really going to work and deemed that plan a failure. And so they went back to the drawing board and had to go back to court. And in 1970, Judge Thompson determined that the Clark County School District had intentionally segregated West Las Vegas elementary schools, and that they had to abandon the neighborhood school concept, that this was not going to work, and they were going to have to come up with a plan that would ensure that the West Las Vegas schools would be desegregated. That's how the school district devised the 6th grade center plan for integration. The only way that they could ensure that those West Las Vegas schools were desegregated was to convert them into 6th grade centers and require all students who attended schools with a population less than 60% of African Americans in their school to attend the 6th grade in West Las Vegas. And so that was actually one of the plans that I participated in, unbeknownst to me as a 6th grader, but was bused from my neighborhood on Sunrise Mountain into West Las Vegas for the 6th grade. And so while that achieved its immediate goal of desegregating the schools in West Las Vegas, you had West Las Vegas students who were now bused 11 out of 12 years of their education, while students who lived outside of West Las Vegas were only bused during that 6th grade year. This plan went on for 20 years. So from 1972 to 1992, the 6th grade center plan, which was a forced busing plan, was the plan that the school district used to desegregate its schools. There were mixed feelings among the black community. Some said, you know, this is an inconvenience, but it's better than segregation. And others said, it's still not fair. There is an unfair and undue burden on black students in busing 1st graders, 2nd graders, 3rd graders, miles and miles outside of their neighborhood to access a quality education. After much of this kind of debate around what the better option was, community members and activists decided that they no longer wanted to support this plan and wanted to end the 6th grade center plan and replace it with a voluntary desegregation plan. And much of this was because they felt that there were actually negative consequences to the busing plan. For example, Reverend Marion Bennett stated that while some diversity was achieved through desegregation, the school district failed to follow up on programs to improve education for blacks and just shipped our kids out of West Las Vegas. Another view from Assemblyman Wendell Williams, who was also African American and represented West Las Vegas, was that we suffered from integration. It hurt us. Had it been separate but equal, give me that any day, as long as it's equal, but integration didn't help us. And so again, we see kind of this paradox of trying to find the best way to educate a population that is segregated based on housing and the choices of adults in terms of where they live and where they choose to send their children to school. And so in March of 1992, West Las Vegas parents determined that busing was no longer in the best interest of their children. And Marzette Lewis was a very vocal advocate in boycotting the school district and demanding that something else be done to provide equal educational opportunities. And so from August to September of 1992, she initiated a boycott where she requested that all black parents keep their children at home from school. The reason that she did that was because Count Day, which is in September, would determine how much funding would go to each school. And so if those students weren't in the schools would not be able to benefit from that allocation. And needless to say, they didn't have to go the whole month because finally the school district said, okay, we're going to see what we can do to resolve this issue. After months of protests, the district established an Equal Opportunities Commission and requested a plan offering black parents a choice of schools both within and outside of their own neighborhood. And so this Educational Opportunities Committee met, and it was made up of a group of community stakeholders. And they determined that numeric formulas, without regard to other human factors and conditions, produces inequality in educational opportunity for a percentage of students enrolled in a district. And so this gets to a larger issue of desegregation plans and policies that question whether a certain percentage of students really ensures educational opportunity, or if it's the climate, the conditions, the resources that are available to students to be able to learn. And so as a result of the protests and the findings of the Educational Opportunities Committee, in December of that same year, 1992, the school board adopted a voluntary desegregation plan, which is known as the Prime 6 plan. And that's the plan that continues to be in operation today. Prime 6 Schools plan ended busing. And so you had no more 6th grade centers. Those were reconverted back into elementary schools in West Las Vegas. It also, though, developed magnet schools, which really, given the various options in school desegregation, have been one of the more successful types of plans to bring students from diverse backgrounds, whether economically and racially and ethnically, together. There are some issues in magnet schools where we see within school segregation. And so there are some troubling trends where you see those students who are in the magnet programs represent a particular demographic as opposed to the kids in the neighborhood school program. But nevertheless, it is one way to, again, bring a diverse group of students onto a school campus. And so we see now some Prime 6 schools that have now also been converted into magnet schools that have specialized academic focus areas. Another component of the Prime 6 schools plan were additional resources. So pre-K education, providing summer programming, additional support staff, and parent involvement programs to provide a more robust educational experience in the West Las Vegas elementary schools. And so when we reflect on this history of school desegregation, which was not perfect, but did help to advance opportunities for many children in Southern Nevada, it's important to consider the role that relationships and trust play, and understanding what many communities have been through and fought for in the struggle for equal education, and getting a strong sense of what it is that parents and teachers and educators and communities want and need and expect from their public schools. Those things can look very different to different people, and the goals and aims and the values of public education really vary. And the only way that we can really find out what parents and educators and students want is to ask them, and to get their voice and to get a better sense of how we can provide quality educational opportunities for all children. And so that, I think, can be accomplished by conducting more local community histories and being able to share that with educators. Las Vegas is a unique place. We have people from all over the world that come here to teach in our school district, and being able to provide them with this rich history can help to put things in perspective as they work with students and parents. And so I think for me also, it's helped me to reflect on my own personal desegregation story, and hopefully gives everyone the opportunity to do that. And to also not only kind of deal with the difficult past that we've experienced in this country around school segregation, but recognize and celebrate the progress that we've made and make a commitment to continue that progress. Education is critical. It's the only thing that someone cannot take away from you. And in the times that we're living in, unfortunately, things are not guaranteed, whether it be employment, whether it be a job after college. And so making sure that you attain knowledge, that you can think critically and independently, and know how to access resources and information to make the best decisions for yourself is probably more important now than ever before. I think one of the sad things about the times that we're living in is that subsequent generations are not going to fare as well as previous generations. And so on a whole, people are not being able to access the American dream the way that their parents did. And so education is really the key to that. And the only way that you can do that is by staying in school, to be engaged. You only will get out of school what you put into it. And so making sure that you're present and that you're recognizing that you are investing in yourself when you stay in school and take advantages of the public education that this great country has to offer.